because of you.
Well, hey there, good afternoon, Cindy Dole, and this is Home Wizards, your radio home for all things home, garden, and life improvement. Thanks for sharing part of this very June gloomy kind of day with me, because we're going to make things bright and sunny for you. This is the show that no matter where you live, my goal is to help you enjoy those spaces you call home more, right? It's too short, life that is, to not. So we always like to find the ways to fix it up, turn it up, inside, outside, small things, big things, you name it. And so we have a lot of great people to join me today to help you throughout the next couple of hours. And I hope that by the end of it, you're going to feel really inspired to try some things. There's some great ideas, some techniques and trends and all that, whether you like to do things yourself or even hire it done. So coming up on the show today, we love to discover great ways to make your garden better. And we're going to talk about organic gardening with a guy who really loves talking about the birds and the bees. In fact, he brought me some eggs from his birds. We're going to talk about the importance of working with nature for nature's purpose and how you can do that in that outdoor space of yours. Then, as we've been listening to the news about these terrible fires in Arizona, and of course, you know what's coming. We always get these fires here in Southern California. We always need to think about that unthinkable, how to make sure that your home and that outdoor space is as fire safe as it can be. We're going to talk with a great fire captain here in Southern California to make us smarter and help us kind of think through those things that maybe you just kind of put off and we can't. Then later on, we got a couple of garden tarts. They like to call themselves that. They really have a keen eye for making those outdoor spaces living rooms, which I love to have, from pots to outdoor decor to really things that bring a sense of pop and color and style, whimsy, playful, you name it. And so they're going to give us some really fun ideas to kind of get you unstuck. And then later on, have you ever taken a look at your home decor and thought that maybe the way that your home is set up, that it's somehow just kind of turning someone that you love off? We're going to talk with a pair of sisters who take this very seriously. I know you've heard of feng shui before, but they are really the masters of feng shui when it comes to love design, and they even have an app for that. So we're going to talk about all that coming up in the next couple of hours. Now, before we get started, a few weeks ago, I was approached by this guy whose daughter invented something that you put in your refrigerator, and it's about the size of, maybe a smoke detector, and I was kind of skeptical of it. And so my husband and I said, okay, what the heck, let's put it in the refrigerator, and they claimed that it's going to make your produce last longer and all this stuff. And I can't believe it really is working. It's a thing called the ozonator. And when you think about it, the concept has been done already. That, you might, if you have a hot tub, be familiar with using some kind of an ozonator system, or, of course, different public water services to make water drinkable. They use this process. But it's kind of interesting how it really slows down the whole food decay thing and the ripening of fruit. So I thought it was kind of interesting. So you have to check it out. I'll have a blog on my website later on, cindydole.com. So now let's get to my very first guest, who is all about working with nature to bring out nature's best in the garden. Okay, so it's not every day that when your guest arrives, he comes with some eggs. So John Lyons is all about really being a master at organic gardening. And what does that mean? Well, we're going to find out, because you've probably heard we've had this topic on before in terms of raising chickens is such a popular thing. We want to be organic. We want to be sustainable. But there's more to it than that. There's also the whole idea of making sure that your garden attracts bees and that you just really are nurturing nature so that your garden can be all of that. John Lyons is here with me, and great to have you here on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
And so, John, tell everybody about how really you grew up on a farm in Ireland. You were raised to do this kind of stuff.
Yes, I grew up on a small farm in the west of Ireland, and I suppose it's in my blood. It's interesting when I meet people here, a lot of the time they come from rural America, or they come from a culture or a tradition where farming and growing food is very important. I find that especially with Italian Americans. When I lived in New York, I had a roof garden back in the early 90s in Brooklyn, and it was interesting wandering around neighborhoods. You'd see these little gardens and the tiny little spaces, and invariably it was Italian-American people, and you'd ask them, and they were 5th or 6th generation American, but that tradition remained, and I kind of found that intriguing. And same here in LA. It's interesting. I ask people about their background, and it's interesting. I heard a very interesting statistic saying that in the last Great Depression we had, I suppose what we have right now is a semi-depression, but a huge number of American people were either directly from the land or only one generation removed, whereas now considerably fewer people are connected to the land directly. So we've become an enormous urban society in, essentially 70 years. It has changed radically. And what is happening right now is that people are realizing that even though they live in an urban environment, they can get back and grow in surprisingly small spaces. And that includes apartments and or rooftops. Anything is possible. You just have to be, creative.
And here we are so connected to our computers and our iPhones and our BlackBerries and Facebook and all that stuff. I mean, I'm guilty of it. It feels like now more than ever, we probably, just for a spiritual humanity reason, we need to do this for our own well-being, in addition to maybe saving money and having,
Indeed. I mean, I think ultimately you don't save a lot of money. I do think that the book, whatever was entitled, The $64 Tomato, is kind of on the money. I think the more important thing is that gardening is a meditative pursuit. I do my best thinking in the garden when I'm completely silent and weeding. The physical exercise aspect cannot be overemphasized. We've become extremely sedentary, and doing a small amount of gardening, 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'd be surprised the amount of energy it takes. But I do think that the most important aspect of it, at least for me, is the quiet, meditative time. And then, of course, if you have children, and it's an extraordinary way to connect and bond with your children in a totally non-electronic way. I have them in the garden. And I have a 12-year-old, and he doesn't necessarily come out and work with me a lot, but he runs around and bangs his drum, and he's watching. And when he's in school, because I teach sometimes at the school, I teach gardening at the public school he goes to, and I realize from his answers that he's absorbing everything. And then some children, like I was a very keen gardener as a child, and I come from a family of 5. And it's interesting that all 5 of us are very keen gardeners. So I think it's very, very important just to expose children to the experience.
And it feels like we are raising another generation that's maybe closer to, our past.
Very, very definitely. And more and more schools, both public and private, in Los Angeles are developing gardens. And I'm involved with a very wonderful project that's just starting in the valley called Calvert. It's the Calvert School. And the woman there who's spearheading it is Tracy Bartley. She actually works part-time for the LAUSD in the whole edible schoolyard. And it's wonderful seeing how engaged children become. And I'm trying to, within the system, expand the experience in the garden to include all the school disciplines such as science, music, art, and have all these events happening in the garden as just another schoolroom that happens to be outdoors. So we're going to work on that in Calvert and take it away exclusively from the food aspect and bring in other disciplines, which should be an interesting experiment.
And you were saying when you taught a class not too long ago at the LA County Arboretum, it was on birds and bees,
Yes.
raising farm chicks and the importance of bees. It was a sellout. So it really shows how people are so much craving this information.
Yes. Yes, it's extraordinary. Every time I teach, more and more people show up. And particularly raising chickens is not as difficult as it would seem. And you don't need a lot. You can create a very safe and secure coop in your backyard.
Yeah, I was worried about that because we talked about this a few weeks ago, and I'm in the area of Glendale where we have a lot of bobcats coming down that will attack deer, and so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have the heart to lose my chicks.
Yeah, I mean, you do need to be careful. Yeah. There's other things. Dogs will kill hens, possums, raccoons.
You have to kind of create a little fortress.
Yes, and if you let them out into a yard and you're in an area that borders onto a public park or a wild area, you need to supervise their running around.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the bees, bringing the bees to the garden, and how do we get started as an organic gardener, not even worrying about being this perfect green thumb person, but really, as you were saying, feeling spiritual and feeling like you have that meditative moment, right?
Yes.
For 15 minutes every day. You're listening to Home Wizards. I'm Cindy Dole here on KFWB News Talk 980. The number is 888-539-2980. We're back in a few. So now, what is out your back door anyway? Do you have a little garden? Do you have a balcony? Whatever you have, there is really no reason why you can't do something to get in there and just take the plunge, and you're going to start feeling really good. Cindy Dole here, Home Wizards, where we talk about ways to feel better, because we're all about making those spaces you call home more fun. And with me is a guy who lives this, John Lyons, landscape designer and gardening expert, and really a specialist in organic gardening. So thanks for being here, John.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, absolutely. And so on your website, which is thewovengarden.com, you have all kinds of great information. You have blogs on plants to think about, edibles to think about, and then you also do some consulting in terms of, or consulting, I should say, in terms of how to get started. Mm-hmm. And you have a very clever thing you call the menu, the a la carte menu. So talk about the different ideas that you would offer people to get started in this.
Well, I find when I go and meet people, the most important thing to consider and to get people engaged on is the quality of the soil in their yard. Mm-hmm. That's the big challenge in Southern California, is to get the soil up to a certain level and maintain it. We have a pretty relentless climate here. We can grow stuff, 24/7, 365. Mm-hmm. So, in other parts of the country, people, the soil gets a chance to rest under the snow. Here it's going hell for leather, 12 months of the year. So people forget that. So it's extremely important to get the soil correctly. So when I meet people, that's usually my emphasis.
And that's even more important with organic gardening, isn't it?
It's hugely important.
Yeah. And then, why is that?
Because you're relying on the soil to grow the plants, essentially, rather than the addition of chemical fertilizers, which we're moving away from very, very rapidly. So, I work with people. I sometimes consult. I just came from a follow-up consultation on a garden on a person I met, 18 months ago, and it was wonderful to walk in and see everything that he had done himself. I just met with him for 2 hours. I gave him all these leaders, and he has realized this beautiful backyard. He has 5 children, one who's just 3 weeks old, and it was just wonderful to see him go from a complete neophyte to extremely sophisticated, self-taught, but I kind of helped get him off to a good start. And I think the reason my consultations work is that they are more preventing the person from making catastrophic errors that are both time-consuming and expensive to change later. So I think that's the important thing. I'm very much about helping people, whether they live in an apartment or a house or a large property, to maximize the growing potential, and to come up with creative ways of growing food in areas where they might not have thought of it before. Instead of a rose pergola, perhaps to consider grapes, or put an artichoke in the middle of a rose bed rather than in the raised bed, and come up with ways of growing food so that it is both functional and decorative.
Mm-hmm.
And
accessible, because if we're out there and we can see it, we can nibble on it and enjoy it, right? And then we're more apt to continue that process.
Yeah, and an area that I love to work in is in orchards. I did an orchard in Altadena just 6 months ago, where we combined California natives with a 22-tree orchard, and took advantage of the new law where they allow us to utilize grey water from the street. So we put in a series of swales, which is a permaculture concept, which is a gardening agricultural concept that sort of grew out of the gardening community in Australia. And in the course of, since November, we have harvested 30,000 gallons of water in this one garden, basically for free. And the regulations changed January 1st of last year, and it was wonderful getting the chance to put them into action. So, but fruit trees are an example of where, rather than putting in a regular tree, a flowering tree or something, put in a fruit tree, and then you get the advantage of flowers, foliage, and ultimately fruit in your yard. So you can put it in the middle of your front yard. It does not have to be a designated food area, which is more of the traditional idea behind gardening. So,
and I think for a lot of beginners that might feel less overwhelming. You know, you can kind of take baby steps, right?
Exactly, and also the removal of lawns has become huge. Lawns, particularly in the front of houses, especially for people who don't have children or their children are grown up, are these green water-guzzling spaces that can be utilised in a much more creative way. And Rosalind Creasy, who lives in Northern California, just published a book, you know, The Edible Landscape. She's the kind of doyenne of this. She was doing it in the 1970s. This book is incredible. It just came out, and it's geared towards Southern California especially, and Northern and Southern California. And she comes up with very creative ways of how to use, you know, lawn space and space that you wouldn't think of that could grow food. So.
And you have some great ideas on your website. You have, for instance, the summer salsa. So that would include heirloom tomatoes, tomatillo, bell peppers, green bunching onions, and cilantro. I always fail at cilantro. Help.
You know, what's interesting about cilantro is it, even in our cool climate, it has a tendency to bolt and go to flower. So the secret is to put a few plants in about every 6 weeks. You have to be a little disciplined. Allow it to go to seed and allow it to flower and go to seed. That kills two birds with one stone. The flower of cilantro attracts wonderful beneficial insects to the garden, and then ultimately it will self-seed. And the cilantro will grow in the correct place at the correct time at its own pace in your yard, because you're letting nature do the work.
Okay, so does that get us to the bee part? We want
absolutely
the bees. To explain how that's so important, because I mean we hear about the population of bees really diminishing.
Yes.
Is it getting better or no?
Very hard to know. There are two major documentaries on the subject. There's a lot of science out there. What's happening in Los Angeles is rather remarkable. There's a group that has formed called the Backwards Bee Club, and it went from just a handful of members to a few hundred in a matter of 18 months to 2 years. And what we do is we rescue feral swarms, so they're not exterminated. We put them in hives, and hundreds of people are now becoming beekeepers in their backyard. Some have one hive. I have 3 hives. Some people who are retired, a few of the members are retired, have several hives in, you know, outlying areas where somebody has donated a hillside. And we are responsible, I would say, every year for saving, I would imagine, several hundred, if not 1,000 plus swarms.
Isn't that? Oh, that's great.
And what's also interesting is that the LA County people who are asked to exterminate occasionally will tell us, you know, about a swarm so that we can get there before because officially they have to exterminate them. And the word is getting out. It's the Backwards Bee Club, or the website is beehuman.org.
You're the bee defenders, right?
Absolutely. Well, there is a hotline that you can call, and a member will come out and either for free or for gas money remove the swarm from your property and donate it to somebody who wants to have a hive.
So, John, you have a lot of courses that are going on throughout Southern California. Anything coming up soon?
I'm trying to think. Mostly the fall. I teach at Descanso and at the Arboretum.
Okay.
I think the next one is in the fall. At Descanso, we're going to talk about what to do when you remove the lawn.
Okay.
So that's going to be one.
And
we're doing the birds and the bees again in Descanso in the fall as well. It's September, October.
And we'll check your website, which is thewovengarden.com. John Lyons, great to have you.
Thank you.
A lot of fun. I'll have to have you back again real soon, okay?
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you for sharing part of your Saturday. All right, well, coming up next, we're going to shift gears. We're going to talk about ways to keep your home fire safe, because we are thinking good thoughts for those poor folks in Arizona, and we know that it's going to be fire season here this summer through the fall, so we're going to get smart, talk with a fire professional. That's next here, 888-539-2980. Maybe you have a question about what to clear with the shrubs to make it fire safe and whatnot. Cindy Dole, Home Wizards. We're back after this.